we have an account system where we have our use cases. For example, determine applicant eligibility. And if we select that, determine applicant eligibility is now a use case. So it's a separate object, but it is derived from that business process. We can look at the use case steps, for example, preconditions, post-conditions, and so forth. And here we have the PD1, Product Division 1, Regional Sales Actor, that was a swim lane previously, and we see the relationships to the use cases. And here at the top in my use case diagram, now I see all of the symbols that are legal symbols for this particular type of diagram, and I can then later go and update this use case diagram. I can associate this use case diagram to a class diagram if I'd like to, or a sequence diagram. But from here I'd like to transition to the solution architecture and transition to the system architecture type of diagram. So from here I'll go to the child diagram. For this account system, I want to see the account system as a whole. I'd like to see all of the applications that interact, the data flowing in and out, and the external factors. So for this account system, I see that the customers are an external source that perform a customer account lookup and into this account system. And the account system is an application as well as the customer maintenance and clearing list. These are all applications, and I can see how they relate with data. So this type of diagram in System Architect is called a system architecture diagram, and it does follow the standard data flow notation. So looking at this data flow, here I'll look at, for the customers support entering in their account lookup, select this data flow, and here I see the data that is the data that the customer provides to the application, such as their customer ID, for example, and their credit card number. Okay. And that data is sent to the account system application, which I can open up and look at this account system application. And here I can look at the details, for example, the description for the application type. Here I see it's purchased off the shelf. I can change that to develop, purchased off the shelf, etc. I could create application subtypes. So if I make a relationship to an subtype, I could do that as so. Application interfaces, portfolio management information, so the effective date of this application, license information, yearly rental costs, build cost, maintenance costs, and a budget center. So I see all of that information here as well for the application, portfolio management information. Okay. And for the account system, I could see the account detail flowing from the application, for example, taking that customer ID and the balance due. And it's being stored in the data store here, found centrally in the middle. And this data store is a logical representation of a database. So for the data store, we can further drill down, maybe look at the details here, what data is being stored in that data store, here in the middle box. Or we could drill down to the data models. So I'll drill down to look at the logical data model for this sales processing system. And looking at the logical data model, this opens up in an ERD diagram that shows this standard ERD notation. Entity relation diagram. Here we have at the top our toolbar with the symbols that are legal symbols for this type of diagram. As well, under the draw menu, we have all of the legal symbols that we can use. So let's drill down, let's zoom in into an area. For example, we can zoom in to the customer data entity. and look at the property details. Here we have the customer ID as the primary key, and we have other non-keyed attributes such as the name, address, telephone number, and credit card. We can look at that in the model, or we can look at the details by double-clicking and looking at the attribute list in this information. In this model, we do see the relationships between data entities and so forth. Now going back up to the customer data store, customer details data store, I could also drill down not into the logical data model, but into the physical data model. Looking at the physical data model that's related to that entity relation diagram, and this is a SQL Server data model where I can now see the details according to SQL Server in that physical data model. So here, zooming in into the same information into my customer data table, I can view the columns of this table, such as the name, address, and phone number, or again, I can drill down into double-click and look at the details in the properties. So using System Architect, I can choose to model and create an entity relation diagram, a logical data model, or create this physical data model. I can transition from a physical data model automatically to a logical data model. I can also use reverse engineering, database reverse engineering, to reverse engineer an external database into System Architect into a model. I can use database schema generation to generate a schema based on my System Architect data model, or database synchronization, synchronizing System Architect data model with an external database. So looking at this type of data, we're looking at data entities. Looking at some data entities, I can open up the matrix browser and choose to make relationships between data entities and other areas of the architecture. So let's open up again the matrix browser, and now looking at the matrix browser at the data domain, here I have a particular data model, a data to business process matrix browser. So I'd like to open up this matrix browser for looking at the relationships between a business process and data entities. So here I can see how the business processes use data, and it's a nice overview showing business processes and what data they're using in a spreadsheet format. So here on the left I have my business processes, and on the top I have my data entities. So I'd like to make a relationship between the business process, determine applicant eligibility, and the data entity customer application. So here's customer application, data entity, and I'll make that relationship, and that relationship is propagated throughout the repository. And I can look at the details again by selecting the business process and looking at the property details for the determine applicant eligibility business process, and see that I have made a relationship between a data entity and the business process. So that's one way of creating relationships between business processes and data. And here we'll